The first sign wasn't a ghost. It was the air in the house, too heavy for an empty room, like Rockford itself was holding its breath. By the time I realized I wasn't alone in the blue parlor, every candle flame was already leaning towards something I couldn't see. This happened on January 3rd, 2026, at historic Rockford in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I'm a 31-year-old high school history teacher from Philadelphia, and I was there after dark candlelight tour. I'd read about the mansion's haunted reputation on a site called Uncharted Lancaster and expected a good story for my students, not something that would still keep me awake at 2:37 a.m. The tour started in the front hall around 6:15 p.m. Outside, it was dark and below freezing. There were 10 of us plus the guide, a woman named Karen. She carried a single taper candle that threw soft light over the narrow stairs and pale walls. A few battery candles marked furniture, but most corners were left in shadow. We stepped into the blue parlor at 6:32 p.m. The room was painted a muted blue-green with a fireplace, a tall sash window, and a short hall leading deeper into the house. I stood in the doorway with my shoulder against the frame and a clear view down that hall. The first strange thing was the smell. Karen had just started talking about General Edward Hand and his family when I caught a strong whiff of pipe tobacco. Sweet, heavy, old-fashioned. No one else reacted. The smell sat exactly where I was standing. When I leaned forward into the hall, it faded. When I stepped half a foot back into the parlor, it returned, like I was moving in and out of someone's exhale. Logical reaction number one, assume there's a normal explanation. Draft from an old vent, someone's coat, my brain filling in details after reading ghost stories. I stayed quiet and listened. Karen mentioned the basement kitchen below us, how it had been the domain of servants and enslaved laborers. Sometimes, she said, people smell apple pie down there in the dead of winter, when the hearth hasn't been lit for weeks. Apple pie and tobacco, exactly what I'd read about before I came. And here I was, standing in the doorway of the blue parlor at 881 Rockford Road with a smell nobody else seemed to notice. I was still thinking about that article when she appeared. From my spot in the doorway, I could see most of the hallway. It was dim, lit only by spillover from the parlor and a single battery candle on a table further down. Shadows stretched long across the floorboards. Halfway through Karen's story, a small figure stepped into the edge of that light. She looked about 8 or 9 in a pale dress that fell to her ankles, tied with a blue sash. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she stood just outside the blue parlor, hands folded in front of her. What unnerved me wasn't her clothes. It was her focus. Her eyes weren't on the portraits or the guide. They were locked on the doorway, on me. Logical reaction number two, assume she's part of the tour. I shifted slightly so I wasn't blocking her view and whispered, "Hey, are you with someone?" She didn't answer. She didn't blink. The candle flames in the room bent toward the hallway, thin orange pointing in her direction, as if something in the corridor were drawing air from the parlor. Karen paused to remind everyone not to wander off alone. A couple of people chuckled. No one moved to make room for the girl. No one even glanced at her. I decided to test two things, whether anyone else could see her and whether I actually wanted to be that close to the threshold. I took a small step back into the room so I wasn't halfway in the hall anymore, then nudged the woman next to me. "Do you see that little girl by the table?" I murmured. She peered down the hallway, then shook her head. "No," she whispered. "Where?" I stayed near the wall so I had solid wood at my back and a clear path toward the front hall. Then, without using flash, I slid my phone out, held it at chest level, and tapped the shutter once while pretending to check a message. The screen brightened briefly, then dimmed. I looked up. The girl was gone. Not walking away, not fading around the corner, just gone. The battery candle on the hall table flickered softly. The space where she'd been standing was now just empty floor, framed by the same long shadows. I waited until the group moved before checking the photo. If it showed nothing but dark wood and candlelight, I'd blame suggestion and let it go. When we left the blue parlor and headed toward the stairs, I hung back. At the top step, while everyone watched their footing, I opened my camera roll. The photo showed the edge of the parlor, the narrow hallway, the small table with the battery candle. The image was grainy from the low light. Then I noticed the reflection on the floorboards. The candle's glow stretched in a streak, but halfway along, the light bent around something invisible, curving as if it were wrapping past a body standing between the table and the doorway. At about the height where a child's face would be, the shadows were a shade darker, a soft smudge against the shine of the floor. The timestamp read 6:34 p.m. We descended to the basement kitchen. The air down there was denser and colder than upstairs. While Karen talked about the work that had been done in that room, a new smell rolled through the space. Warm, spiced, unmistakable. Apple pie, cinnamon butter, baked apples. The guy in front of me laughed and said, "Now I'm hungry. Karen just said, like, we don't cook in this house in January, and moved on. I didn't bolt for the door. I finished the tour, thanked Karen, and walked alone across the frozen gravel back to my car. The mansion's dark windows looked out over the park, and for a second I had the very clear, very unreasonable feeling that something behind them was watching me leave. Before I started the engine, I checked the photo again. The warped strip of light was still there, bending around empty air, as if it were flowing past a body that refused to fully appear. The darker smudge at head height was still visible if you zoomed in. Since that night, I've woken more than once at 2:37 a.m. to a trace of pipe tobacco in my smoke-free apartment, or the faintest hint of cinnamon in a cold kitchen. I tell myself it's nothing. Someone on the street below, a neighbor cooking late, my brain connecting patterns that aren't really there. But sometimes when the air suddenly feels heavier for no good reason, I remember standing in the doorway of the blue parlor and realizing I was being watched by something the rest of the room refused to see. Some houses like Rockford, remember who walks their halls. I'm starting to wonder if, once they notice you, they ever really let you go? If you've ever felt watched in an old place, share it below. I hope Rockford only chose me. The first thing I heard wasn't a voice. It was keys moving somewhere ahead of us in the dark corridor, slow and deliberate, like someone was checking doors without rushing. At 9:14 p.m., inside a station that hasn't legally held prisoners in decades, every key on our own ring began to tremble against the metal table at once. Nobody laughed after that. Nobody said it was the wind. We all just listened. This happened on January 3rd, 2026, inside the old Lark Lane police station near the junction of Lark Lane and Linnet Lane in Liverpool, Merseyside, United Kingdom. I'm the lead investigator for Dead Live Paranormal Investigations. We had written permission to be inside from 8 p.m. to midnight. We logged the entry, the time, the rooms visited, and the exit. I expected drafts, loose fittings, and people freaking themselves out in silence. Instead, I left feeling like the building had watched us the way an officer watches people he doesn't trust. We arrived at 7:42 p.m. The rain had stopped, but the road still shone under the streetlights. Lark Lane was mostly quiet, restaurant lights low, shutters down, only the occasional car hissing past on wet asphalt. We unlocked the front door at 7:56 p.m. The smell hit immediately. Cold metal, old paper, dust, and the faint trace of disinfectant from another decade. It felt like the air hadn't moved in years. There were 4 of us. Liam had a thermal imaging. Priya ran audio and EVPs. Jacob logged everything and controlled timestamps. My job was simple: keep everyone calm, document properly, and leave if safety was even slightly in question. We walked through the charge desk and down toward the holding cells. 7 doors in a row, thick hinges. A narrow hallway where sound doesn't echo so much as sit in place. Names scratched into brick had been painted over again and again, but you could still see the shallow scars if you looked closely. At 8:09 p.m., we did baseline checks. Everything was normal. At 8:21 p.m., it wasn't. We were standing outside cell 3 when Liam stopped and slowly raised the thermal camera. A cold patch appeared on the screen so fast that he thought the device malfunctioned. The temperature in that one spot dropped from 14 degrees Celsius to -3 degrees Celsius in seconds. Not moving air, not a breeze, a fixed shape of cold, as if something had taken up space right in front of the door. Our breath turned visible. The brick walls behind remained the same color on thermal, unchanged, as if the cold wasn't coming from them at all. It was suspended. We checked for a normal cause: vents, gaps, open windows, cracks and seals, drafts. Nothing matched the speed or intensity of the drop. We logged 8:21 p.m., cell 3, fixed cold anomaly. We moved on without dramatics. Staying rational was part of the work. At 8:39 p.m., Priya lifted a hand, eyes on the recorder. We went silent. She replayed the last capture. Someone whispered my name, not echoing from down the hall, not distorted radio. It sounded like breath against skin, close enough that if it had been a living person I would have turned because they were inside my personal space. It was quiet and certain, not one of us. We tried to debunk it. We checked our own voices, jacket friction, radio interference, passing cars, phone interference, and environmental noises. The whisper didn't sound like anything moving through the building. It sounded like something that had leaned in and then stepped back. The detail that made the building feel aware was the key ring. On the intake desk sits the original iron ring with the cell keys still attached. They don't jingle lightly, they thud. Thick metal, blackened with years of hands. We hadn't touched them. At 9:03 p.m., the ring shifted. It slid a fraction of an inch across the metal. Then the unmistakable sound of keys in motion filled the room. The heavy, uneven rhythm of someone walking and letting them swing loosely. Jacob opened the inner cell corridor door. Empty hallway. The sound didn't locate itself. It didn't fade. It stayed near us, circling the desk, as if whoever held them was pacing while deciding something. Locals call the presence the jailer. They don't describe features. They describe a shape at the end of the corridor that blocks the emergency light, broad-shouldered, sometimes with the suggestion of an old peaked cap, always preceded by the sound of keys and measured footsteps that don't try to hide. We saw that shape at 9:17 p.m. The camera fixed at the end of the hall showed darkness that behaved wrong. It didn't recede from light. It occupied space. The far end thickened, then shifted left and right like someone adjusting stance. You couldn't see a face. You could only see where light should have been and wasn't. The temperature fell again. Our breath fogged in front of us in thin white trails. We did not provoke him. We didn't shout. We didn't whisper challenges. We documented and positioned for exit, making sure everyone knew the way back without turning around fully to the corridor. At 9:26 p.m., the door of cell 2 rattled. It wasn't violent. It was practiced. Bars shaking once like hands wrapped around them out of habit, just checking if the lock had changed since last time. The sound of iron acknowledging that it had always been shut and still was. We backed out, locked the inner gate, and stood where 2 exits were visible. That wasn't fear. That was discipline. Through the reinforced window, the hallway looked thinner than before. On the monitor, the darker section at the end of the corridor stayed where it had been, unmoving but present, like a man standing post and waiting. At 9:44 p.m., the keys sounded again, farther down the block. The sound moved slowly and stopped outside cell 3, then cell 4, then cell 5, as if someone invisible was still doing the job they had done when those doors held people who waited for morning and charges and sentences. Nobody spoke while this happened. There are moments when language makes things worse. This was one of them. At 10:02 p.m., the clearest evidence appeared. On the stainless steel table beside the keys, a cold handprint formed, not leftover heat fading, cold appearing. The thermal screen showed a palm and 5 fingers arriving one after the other, as if someone had leaned in casually and rested their hand while deciding something. The proportions were adult. None of us had touched that table. None of us wanted to after. We stayed until 11:12 p.m. because leaving in a panic teaches you the wrong lessons. We shut every interior door we had opened, turned off every light we had turned on, and logged the exit time. When I turned the final key in the front door, I had the sudden, unshakable feeling that someone stood on the other side of the glass, making sure we were actually leaving and that everything inside remained exactly where it should. I don't claim to know what the jailer is. I don't claim proof that satisfies everyone. What I know is simple and recorded. My name was whispered. Where no living person stood, cold appeared in fixed shapes that behaved like someone occupying space. Heavy keys moved without our hands on them. A cell door rattled like it had thousands of times before, and a handprint colder than steel formed beside the original key ring, as if ownership were being quietly restated. Since January 3rd, 2026, when lifts stop on my floor late at night and hesitate before opening, I listen without meaning to. Not for voices, not for footsteps, for the small, patient sound of keys brushing one another. The sound of a man who never clocked out, deciding which doors are meant to open and which should stay closed forever. If you've ever felt watched in an old place, share it below. I hope Lark Lane only chose me. The platform was almost empty at 2:14 a.m. at Times Square, 42nd Street, when I saw her standing past the yellow line, face angled slightly toward me, pale blue mask covering most of her face. The tunnel air moved around her coat, like she wasn't quite anchored to the ground. She tilted her head, studied me like a doctor deciding something, and asked a simple, quiet question that didn't echo, even though it should have. Am I pretty? This happened on December 29th, 2025. In New York City. I just finished a night shift and was transferring trains alone. I'd heard the Japanese legend before, Kuchisake Onna, but only as internet content, something people stitched on TikTok for views. It didn't feel like that when she stepped close enough that the tunnel air smelled faintly sweet, like cherry lip gloss mixed with antiseptic. I entered the station at 1:57 a.m. The late crowd was gone, cleaning crews finishing up. The board over my head said the next N train was due at 2:18. A man slept near the stairs with a backpack under his head. Two teens filmed something on their phone and left laughing. After they disappeared, the station settled into that deeper quiet New Yorkers know, the hour when only the building itself makes noise. At 2:08 a.m., I moved farther down the platform where the light was brighter. The tile here still glistened from mopping. Somewhere below, a train screamed, metal grinding on metal. I remember thinking I just wanted to get home before the cold sank in completely. Then that smell drifted through again. Cherry sweet, clean, chemical. Out of place in a subway that usually smells like ozone and brake dust. At 2:11 a.m., she was suddenly there. She hadn't walked up in my peripheral vision the way people normally do. One empty glance down the platform, and the next time I looked, she existed inside my awareness, like she'd been dropped in place. She stood between two pillars about 20 feet away. Long coat, straight dark hair, pale mask. No movement, no fidgeting. Her hands rested at her sides, like she had nowhere to be except exactly where I was looking. She took one slow step forward, shoes touching the safety stripe. Her head tilted the smallest amount. "Am I pretty?" Her voice wasn't threatening or playful. It was careful, curious, practiced. Logical reaction in New York at 2 a.m. Ignore strangers and stay where there are cameras and light. I focused on the tunnel, as if the train mattered more than the question. But every hair on my arms lifted like my body knew something my brain was still arguing with. She stepped closer. Same speed, same smooth motion. "Am I pretty?" That was when the legend caught up with me. The mask, the scissors, the wrong answer on either side. The average response being safest. For a second it felt ridiculous to be thinking about folklore in a city built on noise and reality. Then I watched the way she stood, balanced like someone who never gets tired, and ridiculous was the last thing it felt like. Logical reaction too. Answer without inviting anything, without insulting anything. "You look fine," I said. Neutral level, average. Exactly the answer people online swear keeps you safe. The sweet, chemical smell intensified. She lifted her hand slowly, pinched the mask at one corner, and drew it aside like she'd practiced the motion thousands of times. I didn't see blood. The horror wasn't loud. It was quiet, a mouth that didn't stop where mouths stop. The lines at the corners of her lips, carrying on farther than they should, healed smooth but impossibly extended toward each cheek. Not ripped, not open, just wrong. A smile built too wide for the face wearing it. She covered it again as neatly as she'd uncovered it. Even like this. The electronic sign flashed 2:15 a.m. The man by the stairs still slept. The security camera above us reflected in the tile. The only thing that felt undeniably present between all of that was her. "I don't want trouble," I said. "I'm just trying to get home." She tilted her head the other way, like she was thinking through my words, weighing them. Metal glinted at her side. At first it looked like a piece of jewelry. Then the light slid farther, and I saw the long blades of scissors hanging loosely from her hand, as casual as someone holding onto an umbrella by its strap. She didn't raise them. She didn't threaten with them. They were simply part of the question. Wind started pushing down the tunnel. The headlights of the train reached the curve. She stepped back from the edge one small pace, then leaned forward slightly, like she was listening for something inside me rather than in the tunnel. "Am I pretty?" she asked again, softer now. The simple truth burned through my mouth before I could think. "You should go home." Not yes, not no, not average. Just the most human response I had left. The train burst into the station in a rush of noise and air. The doors opened. I stepped into the car nearest me without running. I turned back before the doors closed and saw only the empty strip of yellow line where she had been, like she had never occupied space in the first place. No mask, no coat, no scent. At 20:22 a.m., between 34th Street, Herald Square, and 28th Street, my phone buzzed even though there was barely any service. An airdrop request appeared from an unnamed device. The preview text said only 3 words. "Am I pretty?" I declined. The car lights flickered against the black glass, and my reflection didn't look like someone imagining things for attention online. It looked like someone who had been measured and almost counted. In the morning, I filed a report that made sense in daylight-y, masked woman, visible scissors, repeated approach, unwanted interaction. At 2:14 a.m., I didn't write the part about the mouth, or the airdrop, or the smell. I found again, later in my coat, sweet, cherry, and antiseptic braided together, like perfume for a hospital that didn't close all the way. Searching afterward only made it worse. Posts, short clips, different stations, same hour, same question. Advice lists in the comments arguing with each other. Don't answer. Say average. Say ugly. Compliment the eyes. Run. Never run. Rules for surviving a thing people still pretend isn't riding the same trains we do. Now, when I'm alone on a platform after midnight and the board blinks delays, the question slips into the silence just beneath the sound of electricity in the rails. Not flirtation, not insecurity, a test. Maybe she's someone playing a role too far. Maybe she's something older that learned new tunnels. Maybe stories follow cities the way people do. They arrive, learn the map, and wait underground until they recognize the face they want. What I know is this: at 2:14 a.m. on December 29, 2025, a woman in a pale mask asked me if she was pretty, uncovered a mouth that didn't belong to the life around us, and waited to see which version of myself I would offer her. The city kept moving. Trains came and went. Announcements played. And something ancient wore a winter coat and rode the N line like everyone else, just trying to get where it was going. Seen her underground. Tell it. Don't say yes. Don't say no.